Equuest, the recently launched 2D browser game, is yet another horse game that is now currently on the brink of collapse. The Kickstarter was launched on the 27th of March, and the game kinda sorta almost died in October of the same year, almost 7 months before the obligatory horse game drama nearly killed it. That's gotta be a new record. And it essentially collapsed due to probably one of the dumbest reasons to date: bad communication. It is surprising that not one but 3 horse games had Discord drama and in-game drama in only a few short months, with Swim falling prey to an arrogant owner, Wild Horse Isles from Roblox, Discord shutting down due to poor decision-making, and now Equuest basically dying from lack of communication with developers. What a time to be alive.
Don't try to stop me!
This video will be covering as much as possible, with developers and backers reaching out to tell their side of the story. I also had a chance to chat with Shu, the owner of the game, who also had her side to share. Equuest in particular is a very sad story to tell, especially since the developers were all volunteers. They did a marvelous job with the art, and really, it is one of those situations where backers and developers both just deserved better. But before we do get into that, I'd like to thank my coffee supporters for being more awesome than Detective Gumshoe coming back for Ace Attorney 7. A girl can dream. Let's get into it. Equuest, for those of you who might not know, is a 2D horse browser game that was supposed to be a spiritual successor to Horse Isle 1, which came out all the way back in 2007. Both games offered some exploration, collecting, and a basic storyline. Horse Isle 1 had been an extremely popular game back in the day, but due to poor management, a horrible community, and greedy practices, a group of players wanted to make a game that played like Horse Isle, but was still its own thing. So they gathered 6 volunteers, 1 paid coder, and then the project manager, Washu Wins. Shu, as she was known, said the following for the beginning of the project. I was chatting with my friends in a buddy chat one day, and we all expressed how we love certain aspects of games and get frustrated with others. We had all been frustrated with the owners, Horse Isle, or lack of care for a game we loved and spent lots of time on. The goal, she explained, was to create a game similar to the greats of the past, taking concepts and ideas that we liked from various different games. We wanted to create an LGBTQ+ friendly horse game that was nostalgic and fun. And so the journey for Equuest began. On the 27th of March 2023, Shu started a Kickstarter to get funding for the game. However, the page had little to offer visually, no gameplay, and little in the form of what exactly the game was going to be. In short, it was a very empty Kickstarter, and most people who want to back a game prefer to have some examples of what they can expect from the end project. They also expected to see at least that some effort had already been put in, and that they are essentially not just backing an idea for a game, but an actual game. Rightfully, when people saw the Kickstarter, they almost immediately called it a borderline scam, and the team had to scramble to get something up for the page. Namely, the artist had to scramble to get something up for the page.
Everyone will please panic!
Their art, which is damn good, helped to bring some trust back into the project, and they quickly got a few backers. Alongside the Kickstarter, they also launched the Discord, and on the 29th of March, they made the following update. Over the next few months, we plan on getting the game client up and running so we can start crafting the map and placing buildings. There will be updates coming soon as I am revamping the Kickstarter. Thank you to all of those who had submitted feedback about the campaign. I am slowly making those changes. Now, a few notes to take on the Kickstarter page are the following. Firstly, they made it clear that this was an all-female development team. Put a pin in that. And secondly, they say, we will do our best to be transparent and communicative throughout the development process and keep our backers informed of potential risks or delays. Let's put a pin in that too. In the months of March and May during the Kickstarter run, she was very active and encouraging on the Discord, posting livestream dates, updates to the posting livestream dates, updates to the Kickstarter, and so forth. They also set up a chat room specifically for backers where they would share the artwork and development of the game. However, a minimum of $5 was required to get into this chat room, even though the lowest you could pay to support the game was $1. This unfortunately created a bit of an elitist chat room, meaning the average person had no idea what was going on, could not appreciate the updates, and were all left in the cold. I'm not saying the community had an elitist attitude, what I'm saying is it created a rift. This would have had a direct effect in how efficiently word-by-mouth advertising was being spread. One of the most important parts of advertising, because so little was being shared outside of the backer chat, People who had not backed the project felt no excitement for updates, and so people outside of the Discord didn't really care. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because although it's a nice idea to keep your baby to your chest to prevent anyone from stealing ideas or to possibly try and make the project more exclusive and more enticing, it will also have the adverse effect of making people not care. Out of sight, out of mind, and by keeping the updates out of sight, people didn't care. In short, share your bloody game around if you want people to give a shit. Now, the Equuest team would also host a slew of live streams, showcasing more art and how they were working on the project. The coder plugged along nicely during these months as well, giving the artists the means to drop their coats and horses into the game as they progressed. And she was also very active and friendly in the dev chat. She was both a friend of Shu and an outside hire. She worked at a company which I will not name, but suffice it to say this company's service was writing code. Now, this fast-paced development only spurred people on more, and the support for the project remained steady and strong. Now, Shu's role in all of this was a sort of quality control. Whenever anything was made, it went through her for approval. This meant Shu was an integral part of the project. She wasn't difficult and didn't push for an absurd standard, but it did mean that someone was keeping an eye and making sure everything was cohesive. And after all, it was her project. Now, on the 17th of May 2023, the project was completely funded at 10,000k, and on the 1st of June 2023, the Kickstarter ended at $11,606 in total, well over what they'd initially hoped for. The Kickstarter ended, the people were happy, and now they only had to wait for the beta. However, despite the wonderful progress and excellent work from the developers, they suddenly had to extend the launch date for the beta. It was initially supposed to be launched on the 1st of June. Now, the reason given was over the past few months, our development team has encountered unexpected challenges and personal hardships that have significantly impacted our progress. From illness among our family members to the devastating loss of loved ones, these unforeseen circumstances have disrupted our timeline and slowed down our development process. She closes the announcement off with, "We understand that trust and transparency are essential in any community, and we want to keep you informed about our progress every step of the way." Let's put a pin in this too. Work continued throughout August, but updates were slim, with backers feeling very unsatisfied with the update on the 2nd of August, which basically said the development was having some problems again. The next update would be on the 3rd of September, which basically said they were focusing on the back end of the project. Needless to say, this didn't make backers happy, but at least there were still some updates happening. Sort of. She was becoming less and less active. They had a hard time getting a hold of her to okay work and get the project moving forward. The only person who could ever seem to get a hold of her was Arbiter, one of the moderators on the team, but even then it was a struggle. But another question was becoming more pressing than Shu's absence. What was going on with the coder? On the 23rd of August, Shu was still assuring everyone that their coder was in fact working on the code. But these assurances had dwindled away with time. Their coder had become less and less active as the days went by. After the Kickstarter, she was active in the developer chat room, but she made no mention of the progress of the project. As of that moment, all they had was a welcome screen, a startup quest, which didn't work because the NPC was invisible, could not give an item to the players, which was vital for the rest of the quest line, and a horse catching minigame that kept breaking. I just want to make it clear that a lot of the backers had been under the impression that the game was very close to a state of beta, so they supported something that they thought was pretty close to being released. Even according to Shu, there was about 19,000 lines of code, so there was something written, but what they had was so simple and mediocre, it was a little shocking for me to hear that the game was in this state. But the coder wasn't fixing these issues. Furthermore, the backend they were supposed to use to add the horses was complicated and difficult to manage, which slowed production. A few people asked questions, but by this point in time, Shu had become even more difficult to get a hold of. She hadn't done a lot for the project by this point, and it was getting frustrating. Arbiter, a mod at the time, mentioned she'd spoken to Shu, but very little info was forthcoming on what was going on with the coder. But despite the missing coder, our trooper dev team pressed on. Shu becoming less and less active wasn't an issue at first, as there was still a lot of work to get done, so the team continued to push ahead, until their work dried up. On the 23rd of September, an artist would ask what they could do further. They had no more tasks to complete, and they'd like to start on the next job. But Shu was nowhere to be found. It's at this point things started to collapse. With their project lead and coder going AWOL, the team suddenly had a large problem on their hands. A apart from being the project lead, Shu was also in charge of the finances. With her missing, it meant they were essentially adrift. The devs started to really try and get a hold of Shu because the backers were starting to ask questions. As a direct result of the AWOL coder updates surprisingly slow to a crawl, Kickstarter backers started to ask more questions, pressing the mods and devs to let them know what was going on with the game, but they didn't have any answers. Arbiter in particular tried to answer all of the questions, but she couldn't say much on the issue as she didn't have much information, resulting in non-answers, which caused the backers to become more impatient. On the 3rd of October, frustrations boiled over. With weeks having gone by with little to no update and no response or information from the owner of the project, the person who had the money, they rightfully became suspicious. Devs and mods both fell victim to attacks from backers, and in this chaos everyone was still trying to get a hold of Shu. But not even Arbiter could get her to respond to DMs, emails and even direct phone calls apparently. Arbiter would also take it upon herself to answer questions. However, although she meant well, her replies only placed emphasis on the fact that Shu was not there, and it further angered the backers. Arbiter was under a lot of pressure, and her response was not the most ideal, even going so far as to attack and insult backers, which only added more fuel to the fire. She was defending Shu, which was admirable, but the backers wanted answers, not excuses, and certainly not attacks. Free advice for those making a horse game: don't insult people who invest in your project. This continued for days until finally on the 6th of October, one of Shu's mods finally told them what exactly had been going on. In very brief, their coding team had been in breach of contract, and this caused a choking point for the development until it could be sorted. The moderator and Shu had not wanted to discuss this openly because there was no ill will towards the coder, they were just looking for another coder. Now, this is all fine and dandy, but this should have been communicated, and comes to that thing of the transparency element that they were so adamant about in their Kickstarter. But let's move on. She would rock up a day later to expand on this, explaining a little more that the contract had some holes in it, causing all of these issues. She further apologized for her actions and explained her plans moving forward. I'm going to leave this up for those of you who want to read through it, but essentially she apologized, she took responsibility, she explained the situation with the coding team, but the developers were still a little cautious about this post. The problem, they explained, was not that the coding team had bailed. It was the fact that nothing had been communicated to them since the start. They had wanted information, they were left in the dark, they had deserved to know what was going on, but instead of explaining this, instead of giving the information, she left them in the dark. I just repeated myself, but yeah, that's what happened. She also claimed that the reason she hadn't responded earlier is because her pings never went off on Discord, meaning she hadn't known about the problem until that point. An explanation absolutely no one bought. And none of these delays, problems in the backgrounds was ever communicated with the backers of the community. What was that line on the Kickstarter again? We will do our best to be transparent and communicative throughout the development process and keep our backers informed of potential risks or delays. I'll leave it up to you guys to decide who exactly here is in breach of contract. Oi, oi, oi. But she offered an apology of sorts. Most of the devs felt the apology felt hollow. ChatGPT was thrown around.
Sorry, my face is tired from dealing with everything.
They felt that a more personal apology should be issued to the rest of them as a team, as the apology they received was exactly the same as the one the backers received. They pushed Shu into organizing an emergency dev meeting, giving everyone the chance to air these grievances and to set some ground rules for the future of the project. Shu would agree, but would schedule the meeting only 2 days later on the Thursday, when Shu had a wedding rehearsal to get to, meaning the meeting couldn't be long. Now this surprised everyone, both for the long extension, as this was a crisis situation, and the fact that she was picking a day she was technically busy, which would possibly cut the meeting short. Frustrated by her seemingly careless attitude towards the situation, the team agreed on the time and the meeting was scheduled. Now, what exactly occurred in the meeting can only be found in hearsay, but here are some key points people shared with me. Firstly, Shu made it very clear that she paid for the coder out of her own pocket. Not a penny from the 11k went to the coding. Secondly, she would not accept a second project manager. The team wanted another project manager to ensure that should Shu go AWOL again, they had someone who could keep the project moving forward. Shu and a few other mods adamantly resisted this and refused. Now this is the one element that really got to me. There's a reason why you have 2 pilots, a first mate on a ship, and a second in command in a space war. Anything can happen. Personal issues, tragedies, financial crisis, mind control, or even just getting busy. A second person who can take the helm if your grip slips ensures the ship remains on course. The fact that they were so against this idea of someone else standing in for Shu when she was not available tells me that for Shu, it's not about the project, it's about her being the lead of the project. But this will bite her in the ass later, trust me. Thirdly, Shu said that she was going to be using a different coding team. 2 men who will be moving the game over to Unity for some reason. Now this brought up 2 problems. Moving the code over to Unity would mean a lot of work had to be redone. They apparently had 19,000 lines of code, so this would stall the project further. The other problem was that they were adding men, and she had adamantly shared, still to this day on the Kickstarter, that it's an all-female team, that you are supporting an all-female team. So a lot of problems were cropping up. However, the problem was this was still her project, so they had to kind of let it go. Fourth, they wanted a backer in the chat. But at first she refused. This was quickly countered with the fact that one of their biggest backers wanted to pull. This person had donated over $1,500. They had one of the largest backings in the game. They wanted to know what was going on, and if at least someone amongst the backers was not being included in the proceedings, they would pull. Shu eventually relented and agreed that for the future a backer would be allowed into these meetings, but she would post an application for it. To date, this application has not been posted nor shared. Let's just cover this real quick. Shu had promised from the start that she wanted open and transparency for this project. However, when presented with an opportunity to be open and fully transparent, she didn't want to include it. This for me is the biggest red flag in the entirety of the situation. If Shu truly wanted to be better moving forward, she would have included a backer the second people started asking for that to happen. But her laxness in this would sadly have an adverse effect later. Now, the 5th point was she did not properly apologize for what happened outright. This upset even more people, but after the whole meeting, most the devers and the backers felt better about the project, especially after this post was made, going over all the changes moving forward. The meeting minutes consisted of a few key points. There will be a backer voice in all future meetings to give them the chance to see what's going on with the funds. Shu will be expected to dedicate at least 20 hours to the project, at least. Communication must be better. Shu must be accessible. She must sort out the funding, fix the legal issues as soon as possible. A new coding team has been approached and would be giving feedback on the 27th of October. A lot more was said in this post and you guys can read through it, but those were the main concerns. Shu also posted the funds and how they'd been used. After subtracting all of their expenses up until that point, about $8,000 remained. Still a good chunk of the money at least. However, what Shu had forgotten was that the Discord had essentially 2 faces, meaning everything that had happened in the backer chat had stayed there. And when they had made the big post about developers threatening to leave on the main part of the Discord, the non-backers were very confused and surprised, saying that they had thought the project was going along fine. This forced Shu to make another statement to explain what the heck had exactly happened. Remember when I said it's not a good idea to have 2 parts to your Discord? This is another reason why. Don't do that. Share. Be open. Be open to everyone that is part of your project or that is enjoying your project. This is not a good idea because it creates a split in your community. Sorry, just don't do that. But despite all of this, the players were optimistic. As long as Shu kept her promise to be available and would push to be a better project manager, the game could be saved. So the project moved along for a few days. In the following days, things did not go well. The first issue was that the coders would take time to sort out the code. But Shu was not very forthcoming on exactly how much work had to be done by the rest of the team in the meantime. So this left the artists and the writers with nothing to do, and nothing was being given to them to do. Although Shu was supposed to be active, Arbiter took it upon herself to once again field questions and give answers as best she could, giving Shu the excuse to not engage as she should have. So shortly after the meeting, the team chatted amongst themselves and a couple started to address Arbiter's poor conduct. She defended her actions, saying that the backers should not have started the riot in the first place. The devs countered this, saying that they really had every right to be angry as trust had been broken and Arbiter's responses only worsened the situation. But overall, people were more angry with Shu than Arbiter. However, due to this conversation and the escalation, Arbiter would leave the group, one of the very first to do so. Arbiter had apparently at one point been in a voice chat with someone that she was not aware was a backer, and she had spoken ill of that backer in front of the actual backer without realizing it, and that caused the backer to obviously pull out of the project. I referred to my previous point. One other conversation that I would like to highlight on the dev chat is the whose art is it really? It was a discussion argument between mods and devs, essentially asking if the artists still had rights to their own art, seeing as they gave it to the project, essentially arguing that artists do not have the right to art when it goes into a game project. But the artists really quickly clapped back and said that because they were not compensated, this art remained solely their property. Some of them even got legal advice. Needless to say, this got a few artists hot under the collar. Now this is relevant for later, put another pin in that. But continuing on with Shu's lack of action, she also did not post any sort of application for the backers to be part of the meetings, and it's still not up. This had an adverse effect on the backers who had been promised better communication from the project manager, not the moderator. And another uproar started, and they started pushing for refunds. And with no other way to avoid it, Shu gave them the refunds. A few pulled, and the funds started to dwindle. More started to pull, big backers, smaller ones, and bit by bit the 11k shrunk down. And then suddenly, Shu started deducting tax from the refunds. A lot of people were utterly confused by this. But Shu was adamant that this was how Kickstarter worked, despite giving full refunds only days prior. Again, people started to push back, now beyond furious at the audacity of Shu, who refused to give the rest of the money. Another explosion happened, of course, and the devs finally walked out, days later resulting in a mass exodus, sick and tired of the situation and just wanting to be done with it. Shu would let everyone know that the refunds had been completed and only around 3k was left over. She would be putting that money to good use and would continue the project. Now I had a chance to chat with Shu, send her a couple of questions. I'm going to go through some of her answers. I'm going to leave it up for you guys to look at, and then I'm going to give my thoughts on it. So here we go. So the first question that I will be sharing is, why was the beta delayed? And her answer is coding. Our coder had gotten COVID back in May and it hit them pretty hard. What was completed at the time was more of a pre-alpha sandbox that the development team could play around with and break, so the coder knew where to look for bugs. The development team agreed that the public would not be pleased if we released the game as a beta, because it really was not beta material. We decided to push back the beta to be able to give a better quality beta. Now, the next question that I had for her is, the coder seemed to have disappeared during production. What happened with him/her? So she replies, it felt like after the coder got COVID, they started responding less and less, stating that the development meetings were too much and it was cutting into work hours. We made an agreement that they could read minute notes and then give me weekly reports on what was done and or updated. The coder also made it very clear that they would only spend 7 to 10 hours a week on the project because they had other commitments. I had started to look into supplemental coders to help them, but it was getting less and less. It was to the point I showed up at their house for updates. I tried to give them the benefit of the doubt, and I tolerated a lot more than I should have because they were a really good family friend, and I kept on giving them the benefit of the doubt, reassuring myself that they would not do that to me. We were good friends. Yet it was happening, and that was a big kick in the teeth, and it still hurts. She should have communicated all of this immediately, and leaving it so long is just irresponsible. But my problem is more focused on the COVID aspect. Essentially, strange events are always mentioned either right before or right after the event, and usually around the time there is some pressure being put on Shu. Let me show you what I mean. She has had a family tragedy which caused the beta to be extended. Her coder got COVID, which caused a delay in the game. She went to a wedding rehearsal during the Kickstarter, right? Meaning she couldn't meet with them immediately. She went into surgery a week or so after the whole thing exploded, and now her daughter tried to hurt herself, causing the legal meeting that's supposed to sort out NDAs and contracts to be extended again. Remember earlier when we talked about co-pilot, second-in-commands, mind control and helms and ships? Here's the payoff for that analogy. She has seen a lot of strife of late, and much of that is causing the development to be hindered to the point that it is stagnating. This is why you needed a second project manager, Shu, and this is why this just bit you in the ass. Because again, the project is stagnating, and if you had a second project manager, the meetings would have moved forward. But nah. Now, the next question that I kind of want to share with you guys is, according to sources and screens people have passed on, you went AWOL during this time in the production, causing a lot of confusion and panic in the community. Why did you disappear in this time? And she says that I did, this is where I messed up, and I can 100% admit fault. Once the coder stopped responding to me, I contacted lawyers to see what could be done. The contract I had with them was very tricky on my side, and we had to do things in a very specific manner in order to uphold our end of the contract and not be found in breach of contract. At the end, she says, I was very fearful and felt a lot of guilt and shame that it had come down to this. Now, I will commend her taking responsibility. However, the fact that after she came back, promised to fix it, and still caused a riot due to her bad communication and lackluster attitude, I just can't excuse. She had a proper good chance to fix it after that initial meeting, and she dropped the ball because reasons? I honestly can't understand it. Everyone was on board for a second try, and she still muddled it due to negligence on her end. And then finally, the last question is, this is a point a lot of people brought up. Why did you suddenly start to dock refunds with taxes when the first ones were not docked? Can you show us a pic or image showing that this is how Kickstarter works? Now, I'm not going to go into it very deeply, but she essentially says Kickstarter policy refunds can be given proportionate to the funds remaining. Now, that is fine. My only comment I have on this is that you should not have issued full refunds and then partial refunds that cause just more frustration and anger. I get it, you want to cover your expenses, but it doesn't look good from the outside looking in. So after this, I got a chance to chat with the coder as well. Now, there's a lot of screenshots here to take in, so I'll leave most of them up on the screen for those who want to read through the emails themselves. I did censor out all of the names in order to keep these people safe, but here is a brief summary from the coder's side. Also, sincerely apologize for my voice. I got sick during the production of this video, so I sound awful, but let's get into it. Firstly, the coder was in a financial crisis when Shu requested they do the code. When Shu requested that the coder make the game, Shu deducted around 9,000 from the total 13,000 the coder had requested due to quote-unquote owed money. This is after the coder had brought down her original price from 35,000 down to 13k to accommodate Shu. These deductions resulted in the coder being paid a total of 4,000 for her entire workload. Plus, she would also be getting revenue on the game once it was released to make up for the shortcoming of the payment. The coder did get paid, which is absolutely fair, but I have to admit that she was going to have a very hard time getting another developer to work for such a small amount. But we'll have to wait and see. Now, Shu had not been honest on how active this developer actually was. As we can see by these entries, the coder had been consistent in her updates, bar 2 instances, April, and a lengthy pause between August and September. After speaking to the coder, she told me she'd gotten COVID in April, a fact that was never communicated by Shu to anyone, and she only told me about it when I interviewed her. Now, the stretch between September and August was possibly a result of working on one large update for the game, which is apparently quite common for coders. But other than these two bumps, overall, there's a consistency in the updates. Now, Shu would also consistently tell her she was not communicating properly. She also made statements like restructuring the development team if the coder couldn't get it done. Now, what this meant is the coder would lose her promised revenue if she was fired from the project, meaning she would lose basically most of her payment. So this was not exactly an ideal situation. Once again, as we can see here, the coder was consistently updating the project, so whether she was communicating or not was not as bad, especially as the updates were consistent. And here we can also see she was also chatting with Shu, and 3 days later she would be angry at her for not communicating again. I get, there are some back and forths here, and each situation has its own, context and stuff. I get that, but what I am focusing here is the coder was updating the code. But in June, the coder would finally put her foot down to all these meetings, saying that having these constant meetings was unneeded and caused a lot of undue stress. She set boundaries. This will be important in a little bit. Now, the reason the beta was extended was, as the coder stated, a mixture of COVID and Shu making constant changes to what exactly the game had to have regarding features. This meant huge chunks of code had to be rewritten consistently, causing a lot of back-end issues. The other problem was the scope of the project. It was a huge undertaking, and with the coder being the only coder on the project and starting to work full-time to make up for her financial loss, she had to cut down her time to 7 to 10 hours a week. Now, after Shu had agreed to these boundaries, she instead decided to show up at the coder's house to tell her that the other developers were saying things like, "We spend more time in the bathroom than the coder is actually writing code." Nasty types of messages. Although it was never explicitly stated, it felt like a veiled threat for the coder to do more work or be dropped from the project and once again lose her potential revenue. I would also like to point out that according to this statistic, the average line of code for a person who has been coding for 20 plus years, as this coder has stated she should have written around 5,000 lines of code in 1 year. She wrote 19,000 codes in 6 months. She was working beyond overtime. Now, during the time that she was working on the project, she was, according to the entire dev team and the coder, going on trips and having her quote-unquote best horse summer. I will not be sharing the pics here, nor the Facebook posts to protect Shu's personal information. But they did share them with me, I did look into this, and yes, there is a lot of proof. And yes, Shu was taking a lot of trips, particularly after the Kickstarter ended during the crunch of production. Now, I want to make this clear, causation does not equal correlation, but the fact is the coder and the devs were working their behinds off to get the project done, and Shu was enjoying herself riding horses. Nothing wrong with taking time off at all, but not when you have a project to get done and there is a crunch going on. After all of this, the coder would request a copy of their contract in order to ensure that they could essentially work 7 to 10 hours. After they pressed Shu to get the copy, Shu was very reluctant to send them, but thankfully they did find the contract eventually. They went over it and realized that the contract was not binding in the sense of there was no date given for when it had to be done, and there was nothing that stipulated how many hours she had to work. As a result of that, she decided to cut ties and move on with her life, seeing as the project had soured quite exponentially at that point. So I want to point out something really quick here. Shu made an update on the Equuest Discord server saying, "We discussed healthy work boundaries and stressed that this project is for fun and not to be a mental drain. We are taking this at a much slower pace, which the development team discussed to be a much more manageable pace." That's a weird sentence. "We have also discussed ways to make our communication stronger and more accommodating for each development team member. We all understand and agree that this is a passion project and is meant to be fun. We want this to be successful, but not at the cost of our own sanity." If Shu had taken this attitude of let's take it slow from the beginning, then none of this would have happened. If she had taken this attitude of let's bring it back down in order to prevent anyone from going insane, none of this would have happened. If she had respected the coder, none of this would have happened. And that's really what it comes down to. She should have communicated, she should have respected the coder, and that's it. She had someone who was working, as we say in Afrikaans, for an apple and an onion for very, very little, and she still ruined that by not communicating and not respecting the coder who was already working at way below rate. Anyway, so that's what I just wanted to kind of share on that. I hope the coder is doing okay. She did not get back to me per her emails, but I hope everything is fine. And yeah, let's get into the final part for this video. So after my discussion with Shu, I wanted to throw out a net and see what I might catch. So I went to their Discord and was surprised to see I could ping everyone and anything. So of course I did. I made a short post asking people a few questions. After this, I learned about artists who still had their work displayed despite asking for it to be removed. And so I asked about that as well, pinging the mods and dev. She would respond and she would immediately remove the art that was asked to be removed. Like I said, she responded to me, but she was rather angry that I hadn't given her 24 hours, which is fair, but then it became rather interesting. So I'll leave this up for people to read when they have a chance, but through this explosion, I learned a few things. Firstly, these people are defending Shu and believing she will get the project going and completed. This all hinges on the fact that she apologized and took accountability. But what they are forgetting is that she'd apologized before people asked for refunds. And now the project is stagnating again due to personal issues. It's a pattern. The second thing that I learned is that the artists are still fighting for their art. A few of them are pushing for their art to be removed, but Shu has been reluctant to do so, saying that the updates on the Kickstarter can't be edited or removed after 30 minutes, which is true. But then you should be removing the artists from the Equuest page and also making a statement clearly explaining that their art will not be used anymore. As long as Shu cannot communicate properly, consistently, and clearly, she will never get this project to the finish line. After my last comment, which I will leave here for you to see, I was muted and Shu changed the subject to Halloween costumes. But then Breezy left a comment that I feel will summarize the way that people really do feel about this project. I'm a little concerned that we get more easy communication about Halloween than we do about the game. That about sums it up. Now, since this blowout, she has taken the time to finally update the logo, add a public announcement thread, and seems to be updating the game. She also told me that Unity will most likely not be used as an engine anymore. It was only a possibility. Still sick future rattle, just quickly adding something in here. One of my friends pointed out that Unity recently changed its policy, making it very difficult for new creators to use the engine and to make a profit out of it. So it is very possible that she retracted the idea to use Unity due to this sudden change, which actually happened in September, although this blowout happened in October, so it could be an either situation. But I just wanted to add this at least into it because it was a very, very fair point. And at this point in time, they are finally planning on adding that application for a backer to be part of the meetings. And the artists' arts have finally been removed, at least some of them. Which is all good. Seeing as Shu does have access to the website, she should be able to do this. But there is a problem with the situation I'd like to point out. Most of this happened after I'd spoken with her in chat and after I poked the Discord to get some answers. Once that happened and people started reacting and started talking about it, she suddenly started pushing to have the art removed, get the backer application going, and updated the logo. But before any of this, Shu had been dragging her feet and taking her time to get to any of this. Now, we can certainly say, oh, but she had a family crisis. But we also have to remember that after the first blowout in early October, she still dragged her feet long enough to cause a second riot where backers started pushing for refunds. My point being, she's already proven that she is a reactionary project manager, meaning she only really does something when serious pressure is applied, and people like this just don't make for good leaders or managers. The fact that she took so long to get to these basic things is surprising, and only showcases how badly a second manager is needed, and the fact that she still says with a straight face that the coder was quote-unquote missing in action and quote-unquote not communicating when we can see clearly consistent updates is a bit shocking. Now, I won't put my money on this project ever. It might surprise me in the future. It might very well. But for now, and considering all that happened, I just don't have a lot of faith in it. But like I said, anything can happen, and it still might surprise me. The next part of this video will be the responses from backers and volunteers. I specifically added this as they bring up excellent points I did not cover in the video, plus it brings home the disappointment these people felt when it all came crashing down. So the first one says, the statement I'd like to make is mostly an echo. I don't think I've ever been more upset about a game falling through because it feels like it failed for no reason. I've backed so many that never got off the ground, but this one is so painful because the funding, art quests, and the start of the world were all there. It fell apart because of bad communication and poor management, and it feels like the worst reason it could have possibly fallen apart. Such a waste of some incredible potential from a passionate community. Next person says, I was so confident in the project that I wasn't even getting the benefit of a lifetime subscription and was still a top donor with over $1,000 in donations. I promised to get the Kickstarter to the funded finish line, and I held and maintained that promise. I'm just incredibly disappointed that promises couldn't be kept on the other side of it all. Everything was there. Everything. It was such an epic failure in project management, and it could have all been avoided. Next person says, I didn't have a lot of faith in the project initially, because of the lack of gameplay footage on the Kickstarter, etc. And I have backed quite a few games that did come to market over the years. But then I found out Shu was the project manager, and I had known her for years on Horse Isle. And I knew people who were in the donor chat already who were talking about all the cool sneak peeks they got. So I originally backed $150, figuring I would be content to lose that if it came to it. Then later upped my donation as Shu kept talking a great game, and it seemed like everything was going so well. And then after the code dipped, finding out I didn't even have a working quest was like a punch to the gut. I felt like I'd been lied to from the start, because Shu had made it sound like testing was just around the corner. And then to find out so little of the game was ready felt intentionally deceitful to me. And I tried to keep an open mind and hear her out, but then I came to the realization that even if the game succeeded and it came out to market, I wouldn't play it. Not after a betrayal like that. So I was, as far as I know, the first to request a refund. Next person says, disappointed was an understatement because I was willing to give the game another go after being promised that everything would be more transparent. However, things spiraled from there and it only got from bad to worse, and we literally only knew because people were revolting and more information we didn't know about was getting released. Between realizing that things were still not transparent and the fact that current non-Kickstarter donors still don't know what happened and no truthful explanation seems to be given to them, I no longer have any faith in the project coordinator not to withhold any information from anyone anymore. She seems to only respond when she wants to or when non-answers can be used, and I'm sorry to say, but that is not how game or community management works. It's safe to say I no longer have any trust in anything that is released by the project coordinator or even the remaining dev team at this point, because even now we don't know if whatever the dev team knows is truthful or not. Next person says, honestly frustrated and disappointed. Every answer was actually a non-answer and often was contradicted later. Every complaint seemed to have a magical excuse. While the game owner project coordinator enjoyed her hot horse summer, we were left in the dark and still are to this day. New coders are allegedly going through 19,000 lines of code, but none of the other devs have met them. Further, the statement that they are going through 19,000 lines of coding prior to the contracts being signed and planned meeting on the 27th seems like it is another lie rather than the truth. Every attempt at mitigating the situation just further resolves my trust in the entirety. I know now that if I request my money back, I won't get it all back, and I also won't be honored as a backer still, even though she has accepted a portion of my funds and used them towards the taxes on the game and fees. That is actually an extremely good point. I feel stuck in the project, even though the project coordinator owner broke her agreement to acting in good faith. She instead got caught and is hiding behind the idea she can wake up the day after and say, we'll be moving forward in good faith now that you want your money back. So you can't have it all back. It disappoints every bit of hope I had for a horse game created by horse game lovers. Next person says, I don't know what I can say that hasn't already been said, but disappointment doesn't even begin to describe my feelings about Equuest. My beef isn't really with one person, but the idea that my art was going to be a part of a game that gave me so much joy over the years. As a kid who was bullied relentlessly, Horse Isle was my escape. So when Equuest came around and the opportunity to join the dev team came, I squealed with excitement. Literally. Everyone was welcoming, and I thought I finally found my people. So when the communication slowly stopped, my anger, frustration, and resentment for joining started building. It wasn't the actions of the team itself that led to me backing out and pulling funding, although they did factor in slightly, but the anxiety I got from not knowing what to do, or if I'd be kicked for lack of art production. I quite literally made myself sick working for the game. Also, let's not forget, 1. I was never paid. 2. I received zero benefits from being a dev. Some devs got free custom horses. My biggest disappointment about it all was that I thought this could launch a career in game art design. I thought I might finally make my family proud of me for finally doing what they saw me doing, becoming a full-time artist. Now it's all just a memory, and it's depressing. The next person says, it's really frustrating being so excited for something the community has wanted and having that blind faith to take the leap with another community member. We were already deceived, and it keeps happening while also getting worse as new information comes up. The trips, how other people's refunds were handled, etc. The only reason this got backed is because of the Horse Isle community who wanted this and believed in it, and it feels like she laughed in our faces and said, fuck you. Now we are having to eat some of our money for no reason, because creators are meant to eat the cost of fees taken themselves per Kickstarter's own rules, especially when the refunds were offered, not requested for no reason. Every turn is met with long periods of time between answers, along with blatant disregard for Kickstarter rules, as we aren't smart enough to look them up ourselves and fight it. I have been patient, I have been understanding, even though I know more than others, and quite frankly shouldn't have to be patient or understanding at all. And finally, the last person had this to say. As a former artist for Equuest, I am extremely disappointed with how it has turned out so far. We had a team full of passionate, dedicated people ready and willing to put this game together, and the ball was fumbled hard as soon as the Kickstarter closed out. We trusted our project manager to handle the things she said she was supposed to do, as she assured us she knew what she was doing and was prepared to make this game happen by any means necessary. Our manager chose a personal friend for a coder, which in my opinion was the first big mistake, as in my past experiences, mixing friends with business tends to go poorly, like it did in this case. A lack of communication and disappearance on the part of our manager, who seemed to not trust us as a team with vital information on the game, killed the project, as we were unable to give backers any explanation for her disappearance, and it led to the distrust of our manager. A lack of research on the information needed to be a project manager and build a game led to this, and in the long run, multiple volunteers lost so many hours of their lives they will not get back for an untruthful labor. I am upset by the situation, distrust distrustful that a game will ever come out, and even if it does, you won't find me on it. Community management needs to be prioritized, and it wasn't. And that's the bottom line. In closing, do not volunteer. I will start this section with this statement. A lot of horse gamers are coming out and people are all over are asking others to help out. But seeing not one but two projects so quickly burn so many people due to mismanagement, I want to implore to everyone, do not volunteer. It's not worth it. If you want to work on a horse game or any game, or you want to be part of a game or any project, wait for something that will pay. Your work and talent has value. You deserve to be paid, and if they don't want to pay you, be patient. Keep working on your art and wait for someone who will. You're worth more than that. Volunteer work is essentially slavery, where the slave begs to be worked like a dog for the sole reward of being told good boy. But with that being said, the failure of this horse game comes down to poor project management. Although many people consider the most difficult and important part of game development to be the coders and 3D artists, they cannot function properly without a captain at the helm. The project manager is the rudder that keeps the ship on course, and if there is no one at the helm, chances are good the ship will be hitting the rocks pretty soon, or get blasted by a Klingon vessel. Point being, the project was badly managed, not in the usual sense of poor attitude or greed or some other obvious signs, but simply through terrible communication and a lackluster attitude, which left developers frustrated and angry and which soured the project entirely to both devs and backers. I've never felt more saddened at the end of a video. Whether Equuest will see the light of day is anyone's guess. It is a game that has brought into sharp focus the importance of having people on a project that not only want to be there, but have the know-how to do it properly. And to Shu, I have this to say. You had a team that was not only raring to go, but had already been going at full speed. You had pixel art, line art, background art, and even a code. You had writers begging to be put to work and a community standing behind you. With all of this in mind, this project had no reason to fail. None. It was on its way to becoming a roaring success. And it failed, not once but twice, because you refused to share the reins. Get another project manager who can continue the project in your absence. Because if another excuse comes up before the end of the year, I don't think people will fall for it again.